This Choircast podcast episode is brought to you by Wild Olive, where we host game-changing conversation about literature, culture, and the Bible. I'm Jennifer Bird, a biblical scholar.
And I'm Jean Patrol, a literature scholar. If you want to change your Bible reading game, you can try reading the Bible as literature.
The way writers such as Emily Dickinson, Octavia Butler, Ursula Le Guin, James Baldwin, or Tony Kushner do.
Every other week, we let modern writers give a fresh take on a familiar Bible story.
Tune in to Wild Olive wherever you get your podcasts.
Western Christianity has spent the last 2,000 years telling everyone they're separated from God.
This is Not Church with John and Nat Turney and Bethany Shea.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. My name is Nat. I'm here with my brother, John. Say hi, John.
Hi, John.
And our adopted sister in Christ, Bethany. Say hi, Bethany.
Oh, I loved that. How long did you think of that one? That was really good.
I literally just now.
Oh, it's so good.
I was shooting for genuine. Did it come out as genuine?
It did. It felt very genuine. And
good.
as an adoptive parent, it really feels good. So thank you.
I'm working on that. I mean, it was totally genuine, of course. Okay, this is boding well. This is the podcast, by the way, that we call This Is Not Church, because if it was church, you'd have got the hell out of here by now. And John and I would be right behind you, locking up the building on the way out, going, yeah, done with that shit. And Bethany would be begging us to come back and come on, it's okay.
Yep.
And baking us oatmeal cookies because she's a good person. But as always, we have guests. As always, this is not as always. As always, we have a guest. Today we have two. We have double guests.
Yeah,
that's amazing. I love when we have double guests. I think the most we ever did was triple, right?
Yeah,
we did three with the book about Christianity before Christ.
Yeah,
or something like that, right? And we had
something like that, yeah.
Like three of the editors from that book. Anyway, it gets a little complicated with three. But we made it work and it was good. Anyway, but today we have two guests with us. I'm going to take a minute, introduce them, read you a little bit about them, and then we're going to get out of the way and let them say awesome stuff. So here we go. We have Reverend Dr. Liz Theoharis. She's a theologian, pastor, author, and anti-poverty activist. She's the executive director of the Kairos Center for Religions, Rights, and Social Justice, and co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. Reverend Dr. Theoharis has been organizing in poor and low-income communities for 30 years. Her books include We Cry Justice, We Pray Freedom, You Only Get What You're Organized to Take, and Always With Us, ? I guess I should have said that with an inflection. She has been published in the New York Times, Politico, the Washington Post, Sojourners, and elsewhere. Dr. Reverend Theoharis is co-pastor of the Freedom Church of the Poor and teaches at educational institutions across the country, including Union Theological Seminary in New York, Episcopal Divinity School, Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary, and more. And as if that wasn't enough, not one, but two doctors. We are well covered in the doctor area here. We have Dr. Charon Hribar. She is a movement song leader, culture organizer, and a social ethicist. She serves as the director of cultural strategies for the Kairos Center and is co-director of theomusicology and movement arts for the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. She co-founded Songs in the Key of Resistance and has been instrumental in creating music and cultural resources like the Songs in the Key of Resistance Songbook and the We Cry Justice Cultural Arts Project. Dr. Hribar combines on-the-ground organizing with teaching and leading social movement music nationwide, empowering communities to integrate arts into their efforts for injustice, and she lives in the Bronx. I'm going to be in New York in a couple weeks. I may have to come by and see y'all. So anyway, I always threaten. I never follow through. Don't worry. I won't knock on your door.
We would welcome you.
We would like you to. We would like you to.
Yay, New York. I'm so excited. I love New York so much. Their new book, by the way, that they both edited is called We Pray Freedom, Liturgies and Rituals from the Freedom Church of the Poor. And now I understand maybe why my earlier offline comment about Rage Against the Machine probably got you like, yeah, because this is resistance music, right?
That's right.
This is like F you to the man. We're taking it back. I need to hear all about this. So before I just launch into some meaningless soliloquy, welcome to the podcast, Charon and Liz. How are you guys?
We're hanging in here right now.
Yeah.
At the time. So yeah, good to be here though.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having us. We're happy to be in conversation.
Oh, of course. I just even after having read your bios, I'm like, okay, this is going to be good. Like, this is stuff we need to talk about. So if you don't mind, we'll just start with Charon. If you would maybe just give us like a little brief synopsis of your spiritual journey, kind of let us know a little bit of your path, that would be awesome. That will get us started.
Yeah. I mean, that's always a good question. And So we were talking about good Catholics earlier with Stephen Colbert. I'm also a good Catholic. I was raised in Western Pennsylvania, just north of Pittsburgh. And I grew up in a Catholic family and a Union family. My family all worked in the steel mills in that area. And so that was more influential than I probably realized growing up. When I was 5, the steel mills closed. And so there was lots of relying on each other, relying on, I think the church was a space people gathered to help each other out as people lost jobs left and right. And there wasn't much left in the town I grew up in. It was also a place where we had a nuclear power plant. We had a uranium plant. We have now fracking and a cracking plant there. So the kind of pollution in the area is high, and have had lots of family pass away from cancer and other autoimmune issues. And so none of that made a whole lot of sense until I ended up in college. And my parents didn't go, but my mom was always insistent that was one thing she was going to make us do before, if she had her way. But was lucky enough to end up at the time at a Catholic college that had liberation theologians that were there teaching. And that really was a space that politicized me, a lot of liberation theology coming out of Latin America. And, having a sense of really understanding faith from the perspective of what was happening to people on the ground, and especially what was happening to poor folks, what was happening to communities that were being impacted by larger systems of injustice. And so that was kind of my intro to how do I think about the world and how do I do something about it? And I was lucky enough years later, not immediately, but to end up at Union Theological Seminary with Liz when we founded what was then the Poverty Initiative. It is now the Kairos Center over 20 years ago. And I'd done a little bit of work in between in Latin America and Peru, working with based Christian communities, and then came to the U.S. and found a group of folks that had been organizing among poor and homeless families for decades and welfare rights others through Liz and another one of my mentors, Willie Baptist, and they were there founding the Poverty Initiative. And it was kind of my faith journey, my own journey of, seeing people suffer in economic hardship and being able to then now see how that was impacting people across the country. As we were doing work with people in Detroit and in Immokalee, Florida, farm workers, and working with kids, that were pushing back against the coal to prison pipeline in Philadelphia, just seeing how, these were, real ethical questions of why is this the way it is and how should it really be. And coming from a faith tradition that I thought taught me that, we were really supposed to take care of one another, kind of Catholic social teaching that really focused on, human rights. And why was that not the case? And so that really has brought me into this work and really getting to see, especially that needs to be led by those that have been impacted, was the work that Liz and Willie and others taught me coming out of the work of the Homeless Union and the work to build a poor people's campaign in this country.
Liz, we'd love to hear something about that from you as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, my journey is kind of long. I was raised in a family that was really dedicated to doing the work of social justice on my mom's side from a faith and interfaith perspective. And so I was lucky enough as a young person to have faith leaders from different traditions who were involved in social justice, kind of liberation struggles all over the world. When they would come to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which is where I grew up, they would often stay and hang out at my family's house. And so, I was able to be introduced to a very relevant kind of faith practice from a very young age. I went off to college in Philadelphia, and my first night I met poor and homeless folks that were organizing with the National Welfare Rights Union and the National Union of the Homeless, two kind of movements that were led by those that were most directly impacted by poverty and homelessness. This was in the 90s, in the kind of early 90s. And I kind of joined that movement, and it became my church and my community, and I have never left. And so it was those movements, those leaders that more or less sent me to seminary, trying to think about both the ways that faith and religion have been weaponized against communities, including our own, unhoused, impoverished folk. Much of this kind of idea that poverty isn't a sin, but that poor people are sinners, which is all backward. Instead, I've learned from this work and from kind of poor and homeless people about how actually poor people aren't sinners. It's that poverty is a sin. And, really have been doing grassroots anti-poverty organizing for more than 30 years now. And I'm lucky enough to get to work with Charon and other friends and colleagues, at this intersection of kind of faith and justice. And I've never looked back.
It's inspiring. It really is to me. And it's interesting to me how the Catholic Church, to me, is a bit of a paradox. Some of the best theology I've ever read have been from Catholic theologians. It seems to me the Catholic Church writ large prioritizes education and study, and they praise academics. And so I've read so much really, really good, thoughtful theology, and especially in certain streams of Catholicism that are social justice rooted. You think of like the Dorothy Day movement, and going on to all of the people that we all could probably name that we like, oh yeah, that person, the Henry Nouwens of the world. And yet there are some parts of that church that are so freaking almost evangelical in their backwardsness. How do you reconcile, or do you bother to try to reconcile those two sides of that coin? That's a toss-up for either one of y'all.
I mean, I'll often say I'm a Catholic with a small c.
Yeah, I've seen that too, for sure.
Because it's, this idea that we do come from a universal perspective, right? That we are supposed to be a church that is, all welcoming and all, bringing forth like the abundance that, God calls for the world into the world. And yet, especially, I think, there surely a division within the institution of the Catholic Church. And especially in the U.S., I think there's been some conservative leaning. And, I often find myself, if I'm in a Catholic church that is that space, I just want to constantly raise my hand and be like, where do you see that?
Yeah.
Tell me where this is in the Bible. Especially because we joke all the time, if you're Catholic, that we don't read the Bible. You read the doctrines and you read the, Catholic.
I've never said that. What are you talking about?
It's often like, hey, you just totally skipped over all of the readings we just did and went to some kind of proclamation that has nothing to do with what we should be believing, right? And But I think all of that to say is the piece of, even what we've been trying to do in some of our work is really reclaiming the parts of faith traditions and not just ceding it to those that have, really taken what we would say is not what the heart of these traditions have to say. And because so much of where even these, where do our biblical stories come from? Where do the roots of our traditions come from? They come from struggling communities, like the people that, whether we go back to Exodus or whether we look at the Jesus movement, they were poor, homeless, hurting people that were fighting for liberation. And so for today, like our way of reconciling that is to really reclaim that and call both people of faith and people that, may have been turned away from faith because it isn't speaking to that reality and the struggles that they're experiencing, to say, like, this is what it's really about. And this is what we're going to, work to reclaim in this moment.
No, it's an enormously important work, especially maybe Liz, you can talk to this a little bit. In the current climate, I've seen throughout my lifetime, and I'm 52 years old. So I'm not even middle-aged. I'm beyond that. The way I live, I'm not going to be 100. Come on, let's be honest. But I have seen and I've lived through these ebbs and flows, right? I have never seen this before. I've never seen a disdain that I've seen for the poor. I've never seen such wanton, reckless, don't give a fuck about the poor attitudes on full display from professing Christians. And I know Trump's not, so I'm not including him in that. But he gets cheers when he does things that directly harm the poor, taking away Medicare from several 100,000 people, canceling EBT and food stamps and school lunch programs to save nickels, to save pennies, while enriching billionaires. Liz, do you find that disheartening, or do you find that to be like a rally cry to like really just bolster the efforts?
Well, kind of both, to be honest. I mean, I think, it's horrible, right? I mean,
yeah.
Literally the folks around this administration, including, like you were saying, folks that profess to be Christian, like are suggesting things like using poor people as biofuel and just actually killing unhoused people. I mean, just like literally the like definition of evil. Literally like anathema, as Paul would say, the Apostle Paul would say, as St. Paul would say. I mean, and so that is like deeply disheartening, right? I mean, it's because it's horrible, and it's about dehumanization, and it's about othering, and it's making all life less sacred, and it has real impact. I mean, when I think about the lives that already were lost. I mean, poverty before this administration was one of the top killers in the country. I mean, in this rich country, it was a leading cause of death was being poor, and not being able to access healthcare. I mean, it was the fourth leading cause of death in this country, the richest country in the human history, right? And that was before the SNAP cuts. That was before the Medicaid and Medicare cuts. That was before the economy was tanking. It was before, this like absolute attack on unhoused people. Just like before all of it. And already like half of the US population was living in some form of poverty, and our life expectancy was going down. So it's just horrible, and it's disheartening. But it is also a rallying cry. I mean, it is also... There couldn't be anything more opposite than like what actually the vast majority of people in this country believe in, and what our sacred traditions absolutely teach. I mean, they're like, whether it's Matthew 25, and I mean, most people know that what you do to the least of these, and then the least of these is defined as people without housing, people without food, people in captivity and jailed and incarcerated, is how you treat God, right? And if we then follow the billionaires that are running our country right now and running much of the world, I mean, they're treating God like shit, and that's not okay. And so there is a rallying cry there. And actually, if we look at our faith traditions, there's these two types of cries that happen in the Bible all the time. Both a crying out in despair and in need, but also a cry for justice. And they're always connected. It's when the people cry out. And I imagine those cries are in the form of prayer and song and ritual and liturgy and protest for sure. But wailing that like your children are no more, or crying that you've separated and ruined families, or Isaiah 3 says, stop grinding the face of the poor, right? I mean, we could say that today, and it sounds like a great message for Donald Trump and Peter Thiel and and Elon Musk, but it's also a cry that it doesn't have to be this way, and that people deserve better, and we're going to make a world in the image of abundance for everyone. And so I feel like we sit at that intersection like every day, right? Both despairing about how bad things already were and how much worse they're getting, but also crying out that we're going to change it, and we're going to make this world a place that everybody can be in and nobody could be out.
Well, and you really mentioned this in the book with like using the persistent widow as that metaphor. Like that blew my mind when I was reading that throughout in the beginning of the book, and then it kind of continues forth. But the sense of like, Liz, you said that poor people aren't sinners, poverty is a sin. And when we become the persistent widow on behalf of those that are struggling and come towards power differentials, or at least acknowledge the power differentials and seek for justice, demand that people are seen and valued, like that persistent widow. I think that's like where the power lies, especially as the people of God demanding that justice is served. And that was just such a powerful witness to me when I was reading that. I was blown away by that. And so I guess my question is like, how do you live this out in your day-to-day lives? You were able to put together this book with a lot of different stories that you've been able to collect, but I'm curious, like, how this impacts you every day, and how can we then walk in that way as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, what's beautiful about all of the stories in this book are they are representative of people that are doing this day in and day out, right? They are communities that have been fighting for years, right, in their communities. And this isn't necessarily new of, especially what foreign justice people have been facing, but there are extremes that it is moving towards right now. And I think there are real lessons to actually learn from the communities and the stories that are shared in this book. I think it is supposed to be a book that, inspires others to take action. And, I think that because there's so many different communities represented, whether you're looking at folks in Aberdeen, Washington, which is a small, former lumber town, and a lot of really poor, homeless youth, right? That their stories of being able to see, the story of Jesus, like that, that he was being condemned by the empire, right? And struggling with other struggling people of his time, and seeing I don't have to be ashamed of the situation that I am in. I actually am connected to somebody that fought back against this, right? And so I think one of the powerful things of all of these different stories is you can find your own story amidst the stories that are there, and they're very different, but at the same time, at the heart of it, right? They are folks that have said it doesn't have to be this way, and there's something that we can do about it. And I think the other side of that too is, I think as we went through the book, there's at different times, we need different forms of expressing that, right? We do, as Liz was talking about, the wailing, right? We need to be able to both despair and to do that publicly. It's not that we have to hide. We're calling people out to say, we don't have to be ashamed and shameful, because that's the other thing in this country, that we demonize and we shame people for the suffering that they're experiencing. And we blame people that it's their fault, right? And so this book is saying, we do not accept any of that blame. Again, going back to poverty is the sin, poor people aren't sinners, right? It's saying this is happening because there's extreme inequality. There are people that are continuing to only, create policies that are going to benefit those at the top. And the vast majority of us are actually, if we can come together and learn from these different experiences of folks that for many years have been struggling, and now more of us are falling into that same, trap. We often say we're one paycheck away from being homeless. You're one paycheck away from, or one healthcare crisis away. And so how do we then take this moment to really learn from people that knows what it means to support one another and to, stand up together against what they're experiencing. And both, again, we need spaces for mourning and for remembering people that have been, killed by this system too soon. And we also need spaces to really organize together, take action together, and to celebrate the beauty of our communities. And I think we can see that spectrum in the stories that are represented here.
Yeah, the stories are incredible. I really love how you make this book very practical, where people can take these different practices of communion and the Passover Seder and the Stations of the Cross, all these beautiful things. And the pictures in the Stations of the Cross are so confronting in a way that makes me have to think differently about the Stations of the Cross as I've experienced them and practiced those before. Really, really good. But I love that you are inviting people into taking these beautiful communal experiences and then putting it into action, that it's not just something that we read about, it's something that we can actually practice and invite other people in to see that interconnectedness that we are supposed to be walking in as humans. Yesterday at church, we did I'm a pastor, and we had just a time of conversation. We did brunch church instead of regular church. And We talked about the current moment and the amount of grief that people are feeling about the divisiveness in our country between the assassination of Charlie Kirk and then just with our administration being so divisive. And for people just to share. And we just like had a moment, like a 2-hour moment of lament and grief. And then people were able to not just verbalize it, but then to write it down in the style of a psalm and to be able to sit in the silence of the grief that they're feeling. And instead of it just being this thing that a pastor talks about and then we move on to lunch, it was an invitation to actually physically respond and acknowledge what was happening in our bodies. And I think what you have here in this book, and for anybody who's listening right now, this is such a practical invitation into what community can look like in a way that's very subversive compared to how we are today as a society. I don't have a question. I just wanted to say that. It was just absolutely beautiful.
I just love that example, right? I mean, like, of turning church into like, you know, both what it has been and what it needs to be and what it can be, of both a place for mourning and grieving. You know, our society is really bad at that. We try to move to like making everything okay, but everything isn't okay, right? And so, you know, I think that's some of how we've gotten to this moment in a country, politically and economically and morally and spiritually, is by denying like the space to mourn and grieve. But also the idea that somehow worship, somehow church is supposed to be separate from everything that's happening in our lives, including being at table together, right? And so if we actually go back, I mean, one of my favorite rituals and stories that's in this book is about a group of unhoused folks kind of reclaiming what communion is and what being at table and being in conversation at table together like really is, and remembering that actually, as opposed to like the big fancy churches and mega churches that we have in our day and age, that like, you know, mostly Jesus gathered with like other movement leaders around a table and talked about what was going on. And in fact, you know, committed to being a part of a mutual aid society with each other, where you would bury each other and you would find healthcare and, you know, kind of form a protest group if you needed to. Because of the conditions of life. And that actually we're a lot closer to being church if we do what your congregation just did and talk about, you know, the things that are upsetting us and how we're going to come together and be in community with each other.
Yeah, it's definitely a departure from what we see week to week. And I know we're still fully in this sort of Charlie Kirk moment. But what was on display today, or I'm seeing clips of today of what happened over the weekend at his memorial service, just has me, it has me despairing for the state of the American church. Did either of you watch any of those clips to see what kinds of things were said by people like Donald Trump and his ilk? I mean, it was pretty foul.
I think both the content and but then also like the fireworks, like how do you set off fireworks at a memorial service and then critique other people that you're not being like somber enough? You know, it's like, what the heck? Yeah.
Tucker Carlson broke out into a full-on belly laugh when he compared the murder of Charlie Kirk to the execution of Jesus, and then blamed it on the Jews in a very, very not so subtle way. There's a bunch of sick shit. Stephen Miller literally quoted Goebbels. He plagiarized Nazi propaganda in his speech. It is an absolute shit show. I'm not sure which way to go from here. But let's talk about poverty for a second, because I don't think. Well, obviously, what you've said still ringing in my ears. Poverty is, or poor people aren't sinners. Poverty is a sin. How have we come to a place, and what can we do about it, where we have weaponized poverty against poor folks? Like we've blamed them for their situation. We've actually cut off the pipeline to funds that would help them maybe elevate out of those systems. We have elevated people who hoard massive amounts of wealth for their own selves at the expense of those people. And what's really killing me is that poor people like red states are full of poor folk who are voting against their own self-interest, and I don't get that. Is there something that we can do as organizers and church folk that can help to turn this tide? I don't have any illusion that will happen tomorrow or the next day, but I don't know. I'm fully in the despair mode right now, actually. So I'm just looking for a hand, man.
No, I mean, I think that, I think there's a few things there. And I think one thing we've been talking about for a number of years is that one, talking about if poor folks are voting against their own interests, there's actually we've studied where a third of the electorate, right, isn't voting at all. And especially a lot of folks that are poor and dispossessed aren't voting because their issues aren't being talked about by either party, right? And so that's something we have to come to terms with, on all sides, is saying like, who is actually meeting the needs of the people in this moment, right? And who's talking about them? Because even when you look at the last few elections, like oftentimes when you can see the presidential candidate might have gone to Trump, but when you had ballot initiatives that were dealing with living wages or, healthcare, those were still winning, right? In places that may have not voted, went for the Republicans otherwise. And so, I think when Liz said earlier that a majority of people in this country do want people to be taken care of, they do want, to have healthcare, like all of these things. And it's like, well, then our political parties need to wake up and actually speak to that too, right? And so I think that's a huge piece. And I think the other piece is, we've seen it with the Grants Pass decision last year, which was really criminalizing homelessness in big ways and allowing, both, again, like red and blue states to do mass sweeps against homeless people in this country. And you see it most recently with what's been happening in DC. It was this, we'll give people shelter, but if they don't want it, we're going to just, arrest them. And it was like, you were never going to give people shelter. You were just going to do mass arrests. And this was a way to completely move people out in a time when we know that there is actually a lot of vacant housing. One of our groups years ago did a study in New York, and, there was enough housing to house like 5 people over the number of, each house. There was like 1 in 5. You could house homeless people with the number of vacant units that are just being held on the market to keep market values high, right? So the issue is not that there isn't housing. It's an issue of that, we want to continue to profit off of this crazy housing market. And so I think it's the reason is, I think why we need to organize among poor and homeless people is like, we have dehumanized folks. We have isolated them. We have, not allowed like us to recognize like these are folks that are just trying to survive, right? And why it's so important, I think, in the work we've done to really organize among, like, there's a slogan that came out of work that we've done for years with folks that said, don't talk about us, talk with us, right? And that's really important to be able to recognize the leadership of poor folks and to hear real stories, and that it's not just statistics, it's not just criminalizing people, right? It's bringing folks together across the table and seeing, that, this could be you tomorrow too, if we continue to like what's happening.
Isn't that the hubris that's in play? And I've heard this a bunch in the last several weeks from people who are like, well, they don't have jobs because they made bad decisions. They don't have homes because they made, whatever, as though they aren't all one paycheck away. I know, I don't know the statistics, but I've read a couple studies that say essentially a large percentage of us are missing a paycheck or two away from losing everything, because we already live so close to the margins already. But this reminds me of, I don't know if you've read much Walter Brueggemann, but his whole thing of the lie of scarcity that we have fomented in this culture that, there's just not enough. I've got to hold on to what's mine. Is there a place in your theology and in your mindset to embrace the fact that capitalism is a massive failure and we need to look possibly to its utter collapse and instituting something else? I mean, I'll tell you a quick story. My daughter, when she was 19, had the temerity, the unmitigated gall to get sick. And she got really sick. She nearly died. And she was in the hospital for months and months and months. Still wears the scars of that, and she's still partially disabled from it. Her biggest sin was not having insurance. So she left the hospital with, I don't know, we never even counted it because it was scary, but it was in the millions of dollars of debt over, this illness that just happened to her. Why the fuck is health care not a basic human right in this country of abundance? Why the fuck isn't universal basic income something we've actually seriously talked about in a country of abundance? Is this something that your theology that can embrace that and pull that in? I don't want to speak. To me, it's less radical. It used to sound very radical to say stuff like that. Now it seems less so because I've lived through it and I've seen the harm.
Yeah, I just think, there's so much to say, and I'm sure Charon will jump in as well. But there are 140 million people in the country who are poor or one couple $100 emergency from absolute economic ruin. And so, for one, it can't be that all of us woke up today and said, we just are going to be lazy and crazy and stupid, right? It has to be like what you're saying. It's a systemic issue. It's a systematic issue. And what the Bible says from Genesis to Revelation is anti-poverty program after anti-poverty program, after redistribution program, after radical economic program, right? And so, what I know is that we are being not faithful to God when we allow people to have the kind of medical debt that your daughter has. When we, Jesus travels around the countryside, setting up free healthcare clinics, never charging a leper a copay, right? This is the reality of the stories and in the tradition that I listen to, that I follow, right? And from the manna of Genesis, where nobody can hoard and stuff shows up, every day, free and accessible to all, to the community of goods in Acts' telling of the early church where, there is no needy person among them because they have made sure to take care of each other, to the kind of Deuteronomic code and Jubilee and Sabbath systems where debts are canceled and workers are paid what they deserve. And, and this is not just about individual charity. This is what nations are told to do, to actually Paul's collection for the poor, which is about mutual solidarity and nobody having too little. We could just go over and over and over biblical economics that talk about, lifting from the bottom so everybody rises and transforming society around the needs and demands of those who don't have healthcare and those who don't have food, and making it so that everybody does, right? And so if that's radical, then I'm cool with us being considered radical. But to me, it just seems pretty basic. It just seems pretty clear and central and core to every faith tradition, including Christianity, which is very clear that the way that we're living, which is both different, but also not so different than the kind of polarization of wealth and poverty in Rome or in Babylon.
Our churches, and again, John and I, and Bethany in particular, we can speak to a particular tradition, right? I try very hard not to throw shade at other people's faith because I don't have any relevant knowledge of that. So it just sounds like it's an easy pot shot to take at somebody. I'll own my faith tradition's failure in this. We weren't raised, honestly, to consider the poor unless somebody was just preaching that week on the Sermon on the Mount. We had to bless our, and then they tried to even equivocate poor with poor in spirit and said, well, bless our, now Jesus isn't talking about poverty here. He's really talking about people who are humble. Okay, maybe, kind of. Although you have a hard time getting away from his instruction to sell everything you have and give it to the poor. And also his admonition that it would be easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle. They even equivocated that, which was silly. There was a clear anti-wealth message in the Gospels. I don't even know how you pretend it's not there. The mental gymnastics required to somehow think that wealth hoarding, and that's what my radicalization is coming to this point where I'm looking at people who, I don't even think billionaires should exist. Like how are you worth 10,000 times the net worth of the person standing next to you? And you're hoarding. Somebody I watch online put it this way. It's like, well, let's stop talking about that as money. And let's start talking about it as security. You own all of this security. You don't have to wake up tomorrow and worry about anything at all. And and the security you're hoarding is coming at the expense of security of others. And so you sit idly by while people die and are impoverished while you enrich yourself. I'm sorry, that's blasphemous. That's
I think it's meant to be, I think Jesus is meant to confront all of us though. Like no matter how much we have, it's easier for us to look towards somebody who has more and be like, yeah, they're the problem, instead of looking to somebody who has less and be like, no, I'm the problem. And I think that's where Jesus is speaking to all of us, that we all have a mandate to take care of those who have less than us, instead of looking to those who have more and be like, those mother effers, what are they doing? I
think we can start with them. Because those motherfuckers have way too much. So I 100% agree with what you're saying. I'm not pushing back just to be an asshole, but I make a lot more money than probably 90% of the world. I think the statistics bear this out, that the poorest people in America are still vastly richer than some of the poorest people in the world. I get that. But there is a matter of degree here that is unconscionable.
Absolutely.
And I wanted to share, there's actually a song that came out of the organizing. So we were talking about music earlier and radical resistance through song. And I think it's not actually in the book, but it is one that our folks have carried with them for a long time. But I think what we're talking about here is, it really isn't about any individual per se, but we are continuing to support a system, and a capitalist system, and talking about that it intentionally creates billionaires and beggars, right? That was something that King called out, right? This system is creating that. You can't deny that. And so this song, though, I think, it said, I went down to the rich man's house and I took back what he stole from me. I took back my dignity. I took back my humanity. And now it's under my feet, under my feet, under my feet, under my feet. Ain't gonna let no system walk all over me.
Woo. Okay. That was amazing.
There's lots more verses, but the thing about that song, so it starts with the rich man's house, but when our folks wrote that song, they were doing a bus tour around the country. It was 4 women coming out of Philadelphia that were welfare moms, going to meet with farmers in Kansas, meeting, with folks that had lost auto jobs in Detroit. And they started to see, like, everyone might have a little bit of different experience of this, but under that same, it wasn't just one industry. They would go down to the welfare office because they were getting cut off welfare. They were going to go, we've talked about going down to the ICE office, but altogether it was this system that was ending up in all of their lives, right? And I think that piece of it, right, is a real teaching from these folks too. It wasn't like, you can't pit us against each other, like, because oftentimes what happens, even in like state policies, right? In Vermont, when our folks fought for universal health care, they said, okay, we'll give you universal health care, but how are we going to pay for it? We have to cut money from the welfare rolls, right? And so it's this, someone said earlier, this myth from Brueggemann of scarcity, right? We know that actually there is abundance. And when people talk about the national debt, like there's this myth that the national debt has any real equation to what a personal household debt is. It's a completely separate issue, right? And so, again, I do think it's not, I think there's more than just calling any individual to consciousness to say like, oh, even a personal billionaire should be giving up my wealth. It's actually, we need to, create a system that is not going to continue to support the creation of billionaires and the creation of more and more beggars, right?
Well, and it's this idea that the system is set up to prioritize these people to the point where this wealth gap obviously just keeps growing and growing and growing and growing. It's much, much worse than it's ever been. We've been talking about the wealth gap in this country for 50 years, probably more. And so, but it just keeps those margins just keep getting larger and larger and larger. And this idea of generational wealth, when you start looking at the statistics of numbers of net worth of people in poor communities, especially poor Black communities, where, the median net worth of a white family is a couple $100,000 and the median net wealth of a Black family in that same area is like zero. Like they own nothing. And then we do these things where we fund the schools based on the net worth of the people who live there and wonder why their schools are shitty. Oh yeah, because they don't have, $1 million homes in their neighborhoods that then can take all those property taxes and fund their amazing schools. There's a school in North Dallas that I was just driving by one day and I'm like, Jesus, that's a college campus. You know what I'm saying? I mean, massive stadium for sports and every kid has technology and there's probably 15 to 20 kids in a classroom and their outcomes are amazing. It turns out, much to our chagrin, sometimes money is the answer. Sometimes access to those things is the answer. And then you go to there's other poorer neighborhoods of Dallas where the annual home price or the median home price is a tenth of what it is in this other place. And you get what you get. Right? Right? This whole Robin Hood idea is the reverse Robin Hood idea of taking from the poor and giving to the rich. I don't know. In my fundy Republican days, I was very, very much a proponent of, that if you work the system, it works for you. You get in what you put out. And that lie has been laid bare, I think. And it allows us to look at those people and then make judgments about how they ended up there. Like you must have done something wrong. You must not want to work hard. Poor folks are some of the hardest working people I know.
Yeah, I think that's going back to this piece of, we have to constantly go back to this idea that it's not any individual problem when you have almost half of the population living in poverty.
No, it's absolutely systemic.
You can't make this, claim.
Well, and I wish it was as simple as calling Christians to the angels of their better nature. But I am routinely frustrated at the responses when you do. Yeah, you're a person of faith, right? Yeah. Well, then what about this? And the equivocations come, and the excuses come, and it's like, okay, so you don't really want to. And again, I'm no one to speak on this anymore. I'm not a Christian. I can't do this anymore. So I'm not throwing stones. But if you're going to stand there and claim to be one, then God damn it, be one. And that might mean getting out of your comfort zone and saying something that's uncomfortable, and maybe voting a certain way. I'm really no Democrat either. I have as big a problem with those sons of bitches as anybody else. They just happen to be a little less shitty.
Right.
And so
they're a little nicer about it. Right?
Yeah. Biden was, I don't have much nice to say about, there's as much war crime that was happening under Biden and Obama than anybody. Obama droned the shit out of people. I had massive issues with that. Anyway, I'm drawn to this notion of social justice. I think most of us are in some way, but it is overwhelming at times. When you see it, to me, the problem is so huge. That's why I appreciate a book like yours, because I do think it helps us to digest these problems on a personal level, one at a time. And I think that's what it's going to take. Would you agree that these stories, I think, break through the noise way more than my blathering on about capitalism and the sins of these stories could possibly hit home with folks? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that, part of it is getting to hear from people, like I said, that are just really, in the midst of struggle, have found a way out of no way, right? And that they continue day after day to commit their lives to doing this work. Many of the people in this book, Liz and I have known for 20 plus years. They're not just random people that are in here. They're people we've organized with and worked with all over the country, and have made huge sacrifices and been willing to commit both their lives and their work to making something different and believing that that is possible. I think that's a huge, in this moment, it's very easy to fall into despair, to be isolated. And I think this book is really a call to break our isolation, to break the divisions. I think as you read the book and hear some of the different stories, you also will see communities that people will say can't come together are coming together, right? And that's what they don't want us to see. They don't want us to see that that we are have much more in common, right? They want to maintain the kind of divisions that they are sowing in this moment. And so I think when we get down to the actual, again, in that song that I shared before, that we're taking back our humanity, that we're taking back our dignity, is a huge part of being able to claim the public space to put out these stories, to practice these rituals, to sing these songs, and to say, you can say these things about us, but look who we are, look at what we're doing, and look at what we believe we can do if we come together. And I think that's really the work. And it's the work that we continue to do both in the book, but in the broader work is to, is really trying to connect people across the country and across, we have global partners as well that we've worked with and communities that we've learned so many lessons with from folks that are struggling in different places that have seen similar trends. This isn't just a U.S. phenomenon. It is something that's happening around the world. These kind of right-wing extremism that's happening. Because I think we are in a crisis of capitalism is what we're seeing, right? And so that, there is a real root in that. And so how do we not, if we look at history, capitalism continues to be able to turn itself over and find different solutions, especially by dividing people, right? And being able, one of Willie, who I mentioned earlier, would always say, you're never going to oppress people the same. You actually have to make people enemies of one another in order to uphold kind of this power structure. And so, our job therefore must be to, again, humanize one another and to see how do we actually come together, and that we do have actually more in common, especially than the very few at the top that are trying to pull the strings right now.
The systemic stuff keeps coming up. We could talk a lot more about criminal justice and that intersection of criminal justice and poverty and the over-policing of Black neighborhoods and the disparity in incarceration levels of people of color. I mean, there's just so much there that's antithetical, but capitalism lies at the root of all of that, as far as I'm concerned, because we've privatized prisons and made them profitable. We've privatized healthcare and made it profitable. There is no incentive at all for these people to invest more. The whole concept of trickle-down economics is utter bullshit. All they do is farm out whatever excess they get to their shareholders. And we've seen the failure of this on every conceivable level, but we hold to it because it's such an integral part of the mythology of America. And I don't know how it's going to take something, I think, pretty stark to shake people out of that. This system may have worked. It may have worked 100 years ago, but it's not evolving with the times. It's not meeting the current need, especially as we do things like move towards automation and people are going to find themselves more and more out of work. What are we going to do when we don't actually need people to pick fruit in the field and it's fully automated? We're not meeting the needs of a modern world with an antiquated system. But I'm hopeful as of this moment because people like you and Liz exist. That does give me hope. And I appreciate that. If for nothing else, that there are still people out there, tilting at windmills and putting their shoulder to the grindstone or whatever. Is it nose to the grindstone or shoulder to the wheel? Anyway.
Nose to the grindstone.
That sounds like an awful thing to say. Put your nose to the grind. Why would you do that to yourself? Shoulder to the... Anyway. John, Bethany, any other poignant things to add?
No, not really.
Bethany's got this look at I don't know, dude. What am I?
No, I just want to give John a chance. Go ahead, John.
Yeah. I was just going to say, to say thank you for coming on, even though we've had all these glitches and issues, and really talking to a very important subject that we joke about sometimes, and we kind of laugh at because it's uncomfortable. But I appreciate you coming on and talking about these important subjects. We Pray Freedom is a book that everyone should pick up. Absolutely. And I believe you'll learn a lot from these pages. And I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. It was such an encouraging conversation. It reminds us of the most important parts of what it means to be human, to stay connected to each other and to see each other. I love the idea of getting more involved with community organizing for people who are listening. If you aren't already involved in any kind of areas of community organizing, that's where the power lies when people get together. And so while I do believe that Christ confronts us as individuals, if we aren't working together in the context of our communities and actually knowing the people that are in our communities, then we're just a resounding gong and clanging cymbal, making noise about nothing. So we really need to work together. So I'm sure that you have a whole list of good community organizing places in your area. And I know that there are some where we live as well. So thank you so much.
Yeah, and I just wanted to give a shout out. We also have a companion website for the book.
Nice.
If you read the book, you'll notice they print the website, weprayfreedom.org. And then anytime you're reading through, there's a little icon that says, oh, hey, look at the website. There's more resources. But a lot of community organizations that are represented in this book are listed. Their websites are there. So there may be some in whatever part of the country you are in. As we mentioned, there's over 80 different organizations that are kind of connected to this book, as well as if you need some inspiration in this moment, there's songs that are talked about in the book, but actually on the website, you can go and hear the songs of resistance and learn them and use them and take them out into the street wherever you are. And so, yes, I would encourage people to also take a look at that. We can also, on the Kairos website, kairoscenter.org, you can find a way to connect to the Freedom Church of the Poor. We meet online every Sunday, and there are folks from all over the country that come, and it is really a place, where a lot of folks that are organizers that have looked for kind of a spiritual and political home, and share stories of the work and continue to encourage each other to keep going in these hard times.
Well, we will provide links in the show notes for all of this so we can point people in your direction. Yeah, it's been said, and I'll just reiterate, thank you. This is a long overdue conversation. And I know it's something that there are people sitting here going, we've been talking about this for years. I get it. It needs to be amplified. It needs to be repeated. We're hard-headed folks. We need to have it drilled into us.
I have to say something at least 7 times for someone to get it, right?
Yeah. And this would be my call. If I have a call at all, it's my call to the churches in the country to live up to the mandate of the gospel. I mean, it's really it's pretty simple. I mean, it's not easy, but it's pretty straightforward that we have a duty to one another. And the best parts of that message is everything that you guys are talking about. So I appreciate it so much. And I hope to be able to connect with you guys in the future.
Thank you for listening to This Is Not Church. Be sure to rate and review the podcast on your platform of choice. If you would like to partner with us, visit patreon.com/thisisnotchurch, where you will receive exclusive content such as early access to episodes, videos of upcoming episodes, and live Q&A sessions. Be sure to check out our Facebook group or follow us on Twitter and Instagram. All the links are in the show notes. We'll be back soon with another episode.